Welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is Wednesday, April 30th, and for today's headlines we have: Trump calls Bezos after a report that Amazon would post products import charges. The only female unit to serve overseas in World War II gets a congressional medal 80 years on. A trial of suspects accused of robbing Kim Kardashian at gunpoint begins in Paris. Harvard promises changes after reports on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. A lawmaker blasted a hospital Super Bowl ad, then he changed his tune. Trump called Bezos after a report that Amazon would post products import charges. After Punchbowl News reported Tuesday morning that Amazon would start showing how much of products' cost came from tariffs, the White House quickly slammed the proposal. I just got off the phone with the president about Amazon's announcement. This is a hostile and political act by Amazon, White House Press Secretary Karen Leavitt told reporters. It wasn't the only phone call about the issue on Tuesday. President Trump called Amazon founder Jeff Bezos after he learned about the news story laying out a plan to show tariff price hikes, two sources said on condition of anonymity, to speak about the private conversation. Later in the morning, the retail giant said that was not the plan at all. The team that runs our ultra-low-cost Amazon Hall store considered the idea of listing import charges on certain products, Amazon spokesperson Tim Doyle said in a statement. It was never approved and is not going to happen. Amazon Hall is part of the company's website that sells products costing $20 or less. Trump told reporters later in the day that Bezos did the right thing after the president called him to discuss the reported plan for Amazon to show how tariff costs were increasing prices. Jeff Bezos is very nice, terrific. He solved the problem very quickly. He did the right thing, good guy, Trump said at the White House. The tariffs imposed by the Trump administration, including a 10% tariff on global imports and a 145% tariff on Chinese goods, have companies and economic experts warning that prices could likely rise for American consumers. Amazon is the second largest U.S. retailer by sales last year, according to the National Retail Federation, trailing only Walmart. Responding to the Punchbowl article, Leavitt said consumers should endeavor to buy products made in the U.S. It's another reason why we're onshoring critical supply chains here at home, to shore up our own critical supply chain and boost our own manufacturing here. Bezos has been supportive of Trump. Amazon donated to Trump's inauguration fund, and Bezos attended the ceremony in January. Last year, the management of the Bezos-owned Washington Post declined to endorse a presidential candidate for the first time in 36 years. As NPR reported at the time, the announcement came after the newspaper's editorial page editor had approved for an endorsement for Trump's rival, Democratic nominee Kamala Harris. A correction. A previous version of the story incorrectly identified Jeff Bezos as Amazon's CEO. In fact, he has stepped down from that role in 2021. An earlier version of the story incorrectly said Bezos donated to President Trump's inauguration. In fact, Amazon donated to Trump's inauguration fund. A previous version of the story incorrectly identified Bezos as Amazon's CEO. The only female unit to serve overseas in World War II gets a congressional medal 80 years on. The only female unit to serve overseas in World War II is receiving a congressional gold medal on Tuesday, exactly 80 years after pulling off an incredible organizational feat. The 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, named the 6888, was predominantly black, all-female unit that was deployed to Europe during the end of the war to tackle a burgeoning crisis, a backlog of some 17 million pieces of undelivered mail. When the women arrived in Birmingham, England, in February 1945, they were greeted by multiple warehouses full of mail addressed to roughly 7 million American soldiers and governmental personnel stationed across Europe, many of whom were frustrated because they hadn't received any letters for months, even years. There was so much mail that one general estimated it would take a unit 6 months to sort and deliver it all, according to the National Museum of the United States Army. But the 6888, whose motto was no mail, low morale, managed to do it in half the time, even in harsh conditions. After their success in Birmingham and the end of the war in Europe, the unit accomplished similar missions in Rouen and Paris, France, while the unit's members received several medals upon its return to the U.S. In 1946, there was no welcoming ceremony or public recognition of their service. The story of the 6888 has gotten more attention over the decades, including in 2019 Matoris unit commendation from the U.S. Armed Forces, a 2024 film, and a years-long campaign to recognize its members with a Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian award given by Congress. The Senate voted on legislation to bestow the award in 2021, and the House unanimously followed suit a year later. Then President Joe Biden signed the act into law in 2022. It never occurred to me that it would happen, retired Major Fanny McClellan, one of the 2 surviving veterans of the 855-person unit, said at the time. However, because of the time required to design and produce the actual medal, the ceremony in the U.S. Capitol wasn't on the books until recently. Earlier this year, over a dozen senators wrote House Speaker Mike Johnson a letter urging him to swiftly schedule the medal ceremony and warning of a critical juncture. Today, only 2 members of the 688 are known to be alive, they wrote. Those still surviving ought to not wait any longer to receive this long-awaited recognition they rightfully deserve. In the weeks leading up to Tuesday's ceremony, supporters have even more reason to grow antsy about the lack of recognition. A webpage following the 688 appeared to be among those purged in the Department of Defense's push to undo diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. NPR reported in mid-March that the unit's story was no longer prominent in the Arlington National Cemetery website, but still findable using the search function. The Department of Veteran Affairs says that 14 of the unit's members are interred at Arlington National Cemetery, while 32 are interred at VA, national, or state veteran cemeteries across the country. The Department of Defense has since restored some of its entries it removed. Representative Deborah Ross, Democrat from North Carolina, wrote a letter to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in early April demanding all web pages be restored, including that of the 688. Erasing this extraordinary legacy is an egregious behavior of their service, Ross wrote, calling it disrespectful to all veterans. This timing is especially egregious when the country's just starting to appreciate the story of the 688th. The Department of Defense has not responded to NPR's request for comment. The Department of the Army, which runs Arlington National Cemetery, told NPR over email on Tuesday that no profiles of individuals laid to rest there have been permanently deleted from its website, only recategorized. The page for the 688 is now listed under prominent military figures. A barrier-breaking battalion. Black women were virtually excluded from military service until the start of World War II, which prompted the creation of what to be known as Women's Army Corps. While the WAC opened up opportunities for women in non-combat roles, segregation policies at the time meant that Black WACs could only make up a maximum of 10% of the overall force, the National Museum of the United States Army explains. The U.S. Army was not fully integrated until 1948. About 6,500 of the 140,000 women who served in the WAC during World War II were Black, according to the Department of Defense. Black organizations and civil rights figures like Mary McLeod Beluth pushed for Black women in the WAC to get the same opportunity to serve overseas. Under mounting pressure and a growing backlog of mail, the War Department created the 6,088th in 1944. They kept hollering about wanting us to go overseas, so I guess they found something for us to do overseas. Take care of the mail, McClendon told the Associated Press. And there was an awful lot of mail. The battalion included 5 companies, commanded by Major Charity Adams, who became the highest-ranking Black officer during the war. While the 688 has been called an all-Black unit, it had at least 2 members of Mexican and Puerto Rican descent. After several weeks of training, the women sailed to Scotland, where they were forced to run for cover upon arrival when a German rocket exploded near the dock, and then took a train to Birmingham to begin sorting mail and boosting morale. Navigating mail, sexism, and racism. The battalion was greeted by a dimly lit warehouse stacked floor-to-ceiling with undelivered mail, including 6 airplane hangars full of returned Christmas presents, according to the DoD. They found rats eating packages of sweets meant for soldiers, mail that had bounced back as troops changed locations, and a maze of recipients with similar or identical names. The DoD cites reports that there were 7,500 men named Robert Smith. The unit broke into 3 8-hour shifts and worked 7 days a week. They came up with a system that involved creating and updating millions of locator cards with the serial numbers and locations of American personnel in Europe, searching for clues to suss out intended recipients. Adam estimated in her 1989 biography, One Woman's Army, a Black officer remembers the WAC, that a unit averaged 65,000 pieces of paper per shift. On top of the task at hand, the women at the 688 also confronted sexism and racism during their time overseas. They were not allowed into local club for enlisted soldiers, and Adam led a boycott of the alternative segregated facilities they were offered, according to the National Park Service. They decided to run their own food hall, hair salon, and refreshment bar, it says. The women were subjected to slander spread about by male soldiers who resented that Black women were allowed in the Army. Some Black male service members wrongly assumed the women of the unit had been sent to Europe to provide companionship, the DoD says, a notion that they quickly set straight. Some of the 688 recreational basketball players were invited to play on the Army All-Star team, but uninvited when the Army learned of their race. And when 3 members of the unit died in a Jeep crash, the War Department did not provide funds for their funerals. The rest of the women collected the money themselves. After the war. Upon the unit's arrival in France, it drew attention from black and white service members who, as Adams later recalled, suddenly found that they had business in ruin. They had to increase security around their compound. With the help of French civilians and German prisoners of war, the unit was able to clear a small-sized backlog of mail in just 5 months. In October, the downsized unit, about 300 members had been discharged by then, was sent to Paris to continue the work. The remaining soldiers were sent back to the U.S. in February 1946, where they received the European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal, the Women's Army Corps Service Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. The unit was disbanded at Fort Dix, New Jersey, without any further ceremony, reads the website of the National Museum of the United States Army. The museum notes that while the 688 may not have been celebrated with parades of public recognition, their achievements prompted the General Board of the U.S. Forces European Theater to recommend the continued use of female soldiers of color along with white female military personnel in such strength as proportionally appropriate. Gaining recognition. Over the decades, members of the 688 and increasingly their surviving family members gained more recognition for their groundbreaking service. Some of the women returned to England in 1981 to be honored by Birmingham's mayor. Adams released her memoir 8 years later and was honored by the Smithsonian Institution National Postal Museum the following decade. A moment in the unit's honor was established at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas in 2018. Their legacy has also been honored in books and movies, including the 2019 documentary and a 2024 movie directed by Tyler Perry and starring Kerry Washington as Adams. These women were fighting for a country that wasn't always fighting for them, but they believed in the seed of what this democracy could be, Washington told NPR's Morning Edition in 2024, and they believed in their own capacity to create important change. Washington and Perry said they worked with a veteran of the unit, Lana King, to better understand the women's experiences during the war and why some were ashamed to discuss their experiences afterwards. One Florida woman who will be attending Tuesday's ceremony only learned last year that her late mother was in the battalion, as Spectrum News 13 reported. King died in January 2024 at age 100. Years later, she was already one of the few surviving unit members who could weigh in on this upcoming congressional honor. I wish more of the 6,888th members were here, and I hope that I'm still here when President Biden signs the bill, she said in 2022 release from the office of Senator Jerry Moran, a Republican from Kansas. That will be a great day. A trial of suspects accused of robbing Kim Kardashian at gunpoint begins in Paris. 9 years ago, TV reality star Kim Kardashian was robbed at gunpoint in Paris. Thieves broke into her luxury rented apartment in the middle of the night, tied her up, and made away with $10 million in jewelry. That included a $4 million engagement ring from rapper Kanye West, who now goes by Ye. Those alleged thieves were caught, and their trial begins this week. It pits the reality TV star against old-style aging bandits, the grandpa robbers as the French press calls them. The 11 men and 1 woman came on foot and bike dressed as police officers to trick the doorsmen at Kardashian's apartment in Paris during Fashion Week in October 2016. One suspect in his 70s, Yunus Abbas, had written a book about the heist. He's already served 20 years in prison for burglary. I told myself this was really the last time, but a 20-carat diamond without protection. That was tempting, he said in an interview with French broadcaster TF1. I had no idea who she was. I was just told the wife of the rapper. The ring, however, was known. Kardashian had been vaunting it to her more than 300 million followers on Instagram. Abbas says they only stayed 6 minutes. His getaway bike had a flat tire and his bag of jewels got caught on the bike and ripped. The jewels fell out into the street. A $24,000 diamond cross necklace fell into the gutter and was found the next day by a passerby who wore it until she turned it in. The amateur gangsters, with nicknames like Old Omar and Blue Eyes, used tape and Velcro to restrain Kardashian and left her their DNA everywhere. They were caught within 4 months. Mohan Owija, lawyer for the security guard who was tied up and now has PTSD, said it might seem humorous, but it is serious. It's theft and violence with guns and bondage, he says. It's grave. Whatever the age of the actors, this is a criminal gang. Kardashian described the night as the worst moments of her life. Her $4 million ring was never found. She will return to Paris to testify mid-May. Abbas says he wants to apologize. Harvard promises changes after reports on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. The 2 reports, which run hundreds of pages, come at a difficult time for the university, which is suing the Trump administration over federal funding cuts. A Harvard task force released a scathing account of the university on Tuesday, finding that anti-Semitism has infiltrated coursework, social life, and the hiring of some faculty members in the worldview of certain academic programs. A separate report on anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, and anti-Palestinian bias on campus, also released on Tuesday, found widespread discomfort and alienation among those students as well, with 92% of Muslim survey respondents saying they believe they would face an academic or professional penalty for expressing their political opinions. Excuse me. The findings conveyed in densely packed reports that are hundreds of pages long come at a delicate time for the university. Harvard is being scrutinized by the Trump administration over accusations of anti-Semitism, and is finding the administration's withdrawals of billions of dollars in federal funding. Harvard has sued the Trump administration in hopes of restoring the funding, the first university to do so. Other schools that have been targeted by the administration are watching the litigation closely. In a letter accompanying the two reports, Dr. Alan Garber, Harvard's president, apologized for the problems that the task force revealed. He said the Hamas attack on Israel in 2023 and the war that followed had brought long simmering tensions to the surface and promised to address them. The 2023-24 academic year was disappointing and painful, Dr. Garber, who took office in January 2024, wrote in a letter. I'm sorry for the moments when we failed to meet the high expectations we rightfully set for our community. He continued, Harvard cannot and will not abide bigotry. The anti-Semitism report was produced by a task force made up mainly of faculty, but that also includes students, a former Hillel director, and Harvard's chief community and campus life officer, whose title was changed from chief diversity and inclusion officer on Tuesday. The report said that bias incidents had been occurring before the Hamas attack and were intensified by the war in Gaza. It found that anti-Semitism seemed to be more pronounced in branches of the university with a social justice bent, including the Graduate School of Education, the Divinity School, and the School of Public Health. A similar task force held hundreds of conversations with Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian students, staff, and faculty members about anti-Muslim bias. That task force summed up the feelings expressed by many of those in two words: abandoned and silenced. The university commissioned the two reports, which were not meant to be investigative. The authors did not seek to verify the experiences described by the people who were surveyed. The anti-Semitism report recounted an episode in which a student asked not to work with an Israeli partner, and an instructor granted the request because, in their view, a student who supported the cause of an oppressed group should not be forced to work with the student identified as a member of the oppressor group. In another episode recounted on the report, people arriving at visitation day for newly admitted Harvard Medical School encountered students yelling "Free Palestine" from a walkway. The report said that some courses on Israel and Palestine were partisan and politicized. These courses were disproportionately taught by non-tenure track faculty members, who were not as carefully vetted as more senior faculty are, the report said. After October 7th, the report said, there was an avalanche of posts by members of the Harvard community trafficking in anti-Semitic tropes. Jewish students told stories of university-run training sessions about privilege in which they were told that being Jewish made them more privileged than being white. Israeli students felt shunned. Some people, upon learning that I'm Israeli, tell me they won't talk with someone from a genocidal country, an undergraduate is quoted saying. The university recently adopted a contested definition of anti-Semitism put forward by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance that counts some criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. The definition is disputed, and critics say it silences speech. The antidotes, gathered from listening sessions with about 500 participants, could expose Harvard to more attacks from the Trump administration. The more time we spent on this problem, the more we learned about how demonization of Israel has impacted a much wider swath of campus life than we would have imagined, the report added. It added, the bullying and attempts to intimidate Jewish students were in some places successful. The two task forces worked together to create a campus-wide survey that nearly 2,300 responses from faculty, staff, and students. It found that 6% of Christian respondents reported feeling physically unsafe on campus, while 15% of Jewish respondents and 47% of Muslim respondents reported the same. The university does not track the total population of these groups on campus. In addition to the 92% of Muslim respondents who worried about expressing their views, 51% of Christian respondents and 61% of Jewish respondents said they felt the same way. Freedom of expression is one of the most critical issues facing the entire Harvard campus community, the Anti-Muslim Bias Task Force said. The results of the survey underscored a dilemma that Harvard and other universities have faced as protests and counter-protests over the war of Gaza intensified. Some Jewish students and alumni have expressed worries about activism and programming veering into anti-Israel bigotry, for example, while supporters of the Palestinian cause say that categorizing their opposition to the war in Israel as anti-Semitism silences their speech. Some of those students interviewed expressed a constant fear of having their pro-Palestinian views revealed along with their identities, which they worried would lead to revoked job offers. They reported being called slurs like terrorist and towelhead for wearing kafis. Palestinian students said they felt unsupported by Harvard administration as they mourned loved ones who had died in Gaza. The feeling over and over again for Palestinians is that their lives don't matter as much, one student told the task force. Pro-Palestinian faculty, so they worried that every comment in class and every article in their syllabuses would be dissected and that the administration was seeking to curb speech to placate critics. There was a palpable sense, the report said, that free speech and academic freedom are under grave threat and many forms of student activism may effectively be dead. In a counterpoint to many findings in the anti-Semitism report, the task force found that Jewish students who were critical of Israel sometimes did not feel welcome at major Jewish organizations like Hillel and Chabad on campus. It recommended better integrating religious life into campus life. In his letter, Dr. Garber listed a series of actions that the university would take to curb bigotry that closely paralleled a list of demands by the Trump administration's own anti-Semitism task force. Those demands deeply shook Harvard when they were delivered to the university on April 11th, because they were viewed as an unconstitutional government infringement on academic freedom. The Trump administration demanded that Harvard institute merit-based hiring and admissions reform, meaning without regard to race, religion, sex, and national origin, and it demanded an outside audit of the student body, faculty, staff, and leadership for viewpoint diversity within each department, field, or teaching unit. It also called for an outside audit of programs that most fuel anti-Semitic harassment or reflect ideological capture, specifying the divinity, education, and public health schools, among others, as centers of concern. And it called for sanctions against faculty members who discriminated against Jewish students or incited protests that broke campus rules. Dr. Garber said the university deans were reviewing recommendations concerning admissions, appointments, curriculum, and orientation and training programs. He also promised a university-wide initiative to promote and support viewpoint diversity. A lawmaker blasted a hospital Super Bowl ad, then he changed his tune. NYU's Lagoni Health aired a commercial showcasing its doctors during the Super Bowl. A North Carolina congressman wondered if it was a waste of money. The 30-second television ad showed star doctors from a top-notch Manhattan hospital clumsily playing football. From the sidelines, a former standout player for the Giants suggested they should stick to medicine. The ad promoting NYU Lagoni Health probably did not rank among this year's most memorable Super Bowl commercials, but it sure bothered one viewer, a North Carolina congressman. The lawmaker promptly sent NYU's Lagoni chief executive a stern letter, noting that the hospital benefits from federal funds. I read today with questions about your stewardship of this money, including our serious concern about your decision to purchase a 30-second advertisement estimated to cost $8 million during Super Bowl LIX. The congressman, Representative Greg Murphy, a Republican, wrote on February 11th. The letter contained a list of pointed questions about NYU Lagoni's finances. It is a sort of missive that congressional offices routinely write to gather information for lawmaking and hearing. NYU Lagoni is hardly the only New York hospital to spend money on a national advertising campaign, although a Super Bowl ad is unusual. Those commercials speak to the intense competition among the country's elite medical centers. The congressman's reaction illustrates that with the promise of being in the spotlight comes peril. But it turns out opinions can change. 8 days after he first contacted the hospital, Representative Murphy wrote a follow-up letter, and that letter could not have been more different. The congressman has gone from critic to booster. Second letter expressed enthusiastic admiration for NYU Lagoni's world-class patient outcomes and superb metrics, such as fewer deaths and shorter hospital stays. America would be much healthier if all hospitals could report these excellent numbers, he wrote. Representative Murphy's letter stated that he had not been left all the more impressed after recently speaking with NYU Lagoni's chief executive, Dr. Robert Grossman. The letter does not indicate whether Dr. Grossman and the congressman had a phone call or met in person. But just 2 days before Representative Murphy sent his second letter, a private jet had landed at the sleepy airport in Greenville, North Carolina, the state's 12th largest city. Representative Murphy lives. The Bombardier Global 5000 was registered to Invamed Securities, the parent company of Invamed Associates, the investment firm founded by Kenneth G. Lagoni, the billionaire benefactor of NYU Lagoni and the chairman of the hospital board of directors. Mr. Lagoni, who is best known for co-founding Home Depot, has given hundreds of millions of dollars to NYU's hospital system. In return, his name appears on the hospital, and Mr. Lagoni's largest allows for free tuition at NYU's Grossman School of Medicine. He is also a major Republican donor, contributing more than 500,000 since 2020 in the National Republican Congressional Committee, which works to elect Republicans to the House of Representatives. He's donated millions more to other Republican organizations, such as Senate Leadership Fund, a super PAC. Records do not show campaign donations from Mr. Lugoni to Representative Murphy. There can be delays in reporting contributions. It is not clear who was on the plane. A spokesman for NYU Lugoni, Steve Rietta, declined to answer questions about the hospital's interactions with the congressman or his staff members. Mr. Rietta also declined to say whether Dr. Grossman, the hospital CEO, flew to see Representative Murphy. Mr. Lugoni did not respond to requests for comment. Representative Murphy's office also declined repeated interview requests on the topic, but a spokesman acknowledged that it might seem a little confusing, that the tone in Representative Murphy's letters to Dr. Grossman went from critical to admiring. His spokesman would not share any information about material Dr. Grossman provided, or what led the congressman to turn so quickly from critic to booster. "I don't have much to add," the spokesman from the Congressman Alexander Crane said. "I certainly understand that, from A to B to C might seem a little confusing, but basically they had a wonderful private conversation." Representative Murphy is a urologist who still regularly treats patients in Greenville. Another doctor at the same office where the congressman sees patients, Dr. Jonathan Hamilton, said he did not know if Mr. Lugoni or Dr. Grossman came to Greenville to visit Representative Murphy. The incoming chairman of the county's Republican Party said he hadn't heard of any such visit either. The operations manager for the Pitt-Greensville Airport Authority, John Hanna, confirmed that aircraft with a tail number matching Mr. Lugoni's private jet was here for a short duration. Flight records, accessible through FlightAware.com, a company that tracks flight information, placed that private jet on the ground at Pitt's Greenville Airport for more than 2 hours on the afternoon of February 17th, President's Day. The plane had flown in from Boca Raton, Florida, and returned there afterwards. It seemed to have been the only time this year the plane went to Greensville. 2 days later, Representative Murphy released a statement along with his second letter. "I was left impressed and grateful for the work the institution is doing," he said. Representative Murphy's first letter on February 11th had posed questions that went beyond how much a Super Bowl ad had cost and how NYU Lugoni had paid for it. The congressman also asked about the hospital's overseas investments and why it had sought a rural designation that would have increased the subsidies it received. NYU Lugoni's is on Manhattan's east side, on land that hadn't been rural for 2 centuries. The letter sought information on whether the health system was exploiting legal loopholes to maximize profit. In his follow-up letter on February 19th, Representative Murphy wrote that he considered all of his questions thoroughly answered, but his office has declined to provide those answers to the public. That is all for today. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye!